Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, What an Orton Gillingham-based lesson looks like. My name is Andrew Lee and I'm part of the Understood team, and I'm really happy to have with us here today Robin Margent. She's an Understood expert and knows a lot about this method. Hi Robin, how are you?
Hi Andrew, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great. Robin, could you tell our audience a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, after working in the insurance industry for a while, having my own business and three sons, I decided that I was going to teach. And about 25 years ago, I started teaching, first in preschool, and then I became an elementary school teacher. I taught first and second grade and looped with my class for many years. And quite a number of years ago, I learned the Orton Gillingham method and learned about multisensory teaching, and got hooked, and I feel like I live it and breathe it, and now that I'm a reading intervention teacher for the last 5 years, I truly do live it and breathe it.
That's awesome. I'll share on a personal note that Robin actually is a reading intervention specialist at the school where my son goes to, and I know that a lot of the parents refer to her as Sergeant Margent because she is just an amazing teacher and really knows Orton Gillingham extremely well. So before we get started, Robin, I do want to tell our audience a little bit about an event we have upcoming. We're actually having a live stream with Whoopi Goldberg on Tuesday at 3:30 Eastern Time. And if you're out there listening and you're interested in hearing about Whoopi Goldberg and her experience with dyslexia, just go to u.org/Whoopi, and we'll paste that in the chat bar. With that said, I'm going to hand it back to you, Robin, to talk about Orton Gillingham and your expertise in that area. Take it away.
Okay. Well, I think let's go an Orton Gillingham-based lesson. Well, first, I think we should go to the next slide. About what we're going to cover today, and we're going to talk a little bit about phonological awareness, letter sound correspondence, also known as phonics, and multisensory instruction, who were Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham, and a little bit about the OG method, and then Andrew and I are going to do a mock lesson, very shortened, but at least you'll see the different components of an Orton Gillingham lesson. Next slide. Again. Okay, phonological awareness. Phonological awareness is the understanding that our spoken language can be broken down into individual units, parts, and sounds that can be manipulated. The smallest part or the individual sound is called a phoneme, and phonemic awareness involves being aware of these small units. So, phonological awareness encompasses a number of sound-related skills that are necessary for reading. For example, a child begins to become aware that words are made up of small units of sounds, and then that those words can be divided into chunks called syllables, and then each syllable begins with a sound and maybe ends with a different sound or the same sound. And that awareness is the starting point for understanding that sound and print letters are connected. That's the first step to reading. A child with phonological awareness should be able to recognize rhyme, break words into syllables, blend phonemes. They should be able to identify beginning and ending sounds in a syllable, see maybe that smaller words are in larger words, like, for example, the word dog in dogmatic. Next slide, please. Phonemic awareness is really one aspect of phonological awareness. It deals with just one thing, the phoneme, and that's the smallest unit of sound in a language. So almost all words are made up of a number of phonemes blended together. The word cat, for example, is made up of 3 phonemes, k, at. On the computer here it says fish, ish. Notice there are 4 letters, 3 phonemes, 3 sounds. But if we take away, for example, in cat, if we take away the k sound and replace it with the b sound, you get an entirely different word, bat. If you then replace the a sound with the sound, you get another word, but. So phonological awareness is the ability to also to recognize that the ways that sounds function in words, but phonemic awareness is the child's ability to understand the smallest unit of sound in a word. In other words, phonemic awareness is a subset or sub-skill under the whole umbrella of phonological awareness. A child with a high level or strong phonological awareness and or phonemic awareness, phonemic awareness and phonological awareness are highly correlated to reading and to spelling success. So it is important, if a child does not already have a strong sense, of developing that sense in the child. And phonological awareness and phonemic awareness can be taught. Next slide, I think. Okay, so phonological awareness certainly can be impacted by learning issues like dyslexia. It can also be impacted just because children haven't been exposed to a language-rich environment or literature-rich environment. Children who have these issues sometimes have a hard time breaking down words into individual sounds, mix-up sounds. They don't see or hear rather the difference between maybe a p and a b. But all of these things can and should be taught. Not only to children with difficulties. All children should have exposure and practice with phonological awareness activities, phonemic awareness activities, and that combined with an explicit phonics program, as well as I think a language-rich and literature-rich environment is probably the best thing to ensure that all of our children become successful, fluent readers. So phonics isn't going to be all that beneficial unless there is at least some level. It doesn't have to be a strong level, but some level of phonological awareness. And once we have that sort of rudimentary level, we can start in with a letter-sound correspondence, that every letter has a sound, and that sounds have a letter or a print letter representation, or it might be a few letters that represent that sound. So the relationship between the written letter and the spoken sound is phonics. The letter B sounds like, the letter B rather, sounds like B as in bear. And once we start in teaching the various sounds to the letters, then we're starting the decoding process and the beginning of reading. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. And here's just the main difference between excellent and poor readers is their ability to use this correspondence to identify words. We have to have, children need a lot of practice decoding the same words to become familiar with the spelling patterns. Children with issues need lots and lots and lots of practice. It's really the degree of the practice, not that one needs it and one doesn't. Next slide. All right, we can teach the relationship of sounds to the alphabet, but teaching children to decode words is a demanding process. It can be done. And again, with phonemic awareness, that can be taught. It's strictly, even in a kindergarten class, if a teacher spends 10 to 15 minutes a day just on phonemic awareness activities, the benefits to all students, but especially to students with issues such as dyslexia, are great. The most effective, again, instruction for reading combines phonologic awareness activities and phonics, as well as having a language-rich and a literature-rich environment.
Robin,
Yes.
This is Andrew. So I wanted to just ask a quick question about, we toss around these terms like phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and then phonics. Is it right to say that the phonological awareness and phonemic awareness are just listening or hearing, and that the phonics is when you tie that to a letter? Or is that too simple?
Nope, sorry, I missed that. No, phonological awareness is auditory. Phonemic awareness is auditory. It's hearing it. Phonics is the relationship between the printed with the sound.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, multisensory instruction is a way of teaching that stimulates learning by engaging students on various levels. It uses the senses, the hearing sense, this visual, tactile or touch, and kinesthetic movement. If you use 2 or more senses in a learning activity, children hopefully have a better shot of remembering it. Most teaching is primarily done by hearing or sight. Students use sight to look at text or pictures. They use hearing to listen to what the teacher says. If you involve more senses like touch or movement, it helps the children's brain or the student's brain develop other memories, tactile memories, kinesthetic memories that they'll be able to use to hang on to the auditory and the visual. And most students, at least I've found in my experience, whether they have a learning challenge or not, they seem to really enjoy the variety that multisensory techniques provide because the teaching becomes more interesting. When we experience what we learn, we understand it better. Some examples of visual learning is obviously text and pictures, but one can also use highlighters and graphic organizers, student-created art. For auditory, it's not just listening on books on tape, but paired reading, music, songs, rhymes, chants. Tactile might involve sand trays, the use of clay, sculpting materials, textured objects, manipulatives. And kinesthetic, which the children really love, involves clapping, hand motions, maybe large movement activities, tossing bean bags, academic races, and I think we can go to the next slide. I'm not sure where we are. And I just gave you examples of some multisensory instruction. But again, using as many senses as possible, you increase the chance that a student's going to retain the new information. And the example we give here on this slide, of course, is you could talk about apples, you could show a child a picture of apples, but certainly if they eat an apple, if an apple falls from a tree and hits them on the head, if they can throw an apple, if they can touch an apple, they will have, if they can cut an apple in half and see what's inside, they're going to have much more of a sense and a memory of what an apple is. Next slide. And we'll give you just a little background now of Dr. Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham. Samuel Orton was a neuropsychiatrist and a pathologist. So he worked with adult patients with brain damage, and it led him to study why some children have some of the language issues that that he saw in adults who had some sort of brain trauma, even though they didn't have any brain damage. So he created a set of teaching guidelines to help children with these language issues. He, in essence, what he did, he came up with multisensory teaching, so that we're using both hemispheres of the brain to learn how to read. Many of his theories have been confirmed actually in recent times by modern brain research. Once we, with the advent of fMRIs, brain scientists can now see different parts of the brain light up and have confirmed that what he said over 80 years ago absolutely true. His main contribution to education, of course, was multisensory teaching. So to integrate movement and touch with sight and hearing strategies for learning. Next slide, Anna. He teamed up with Anna Gillingham, who was an educator and a psychologist. And what she did was take his Dr. Orton's teaching methods and her analysis of the structure of the English language. So what she did was she went from maybe the easiest sound to say, all the way to more difficult concepts, and she structured it into a systematic approach to teaching the 44 phonemes in the English language. And together it's called the Orton-Gillingham method. So it's language-based, it's multisensory, it's structured, sequential and cumulative. That is, we build upon, you learn one thing, you build upon it, and you keep building upon it. Everything is taught to mastery, and it is flexible. If you notice something was forgotten, it wasn't learned to mastery, you go back, you reteach it, or you re-review it over and over again until it's automatic. Next slide. In essence, the OG method is teaching the structure of the English language to the children. It's not only the phonemes, but we're teaching the history of the language. We're teaching roots and suffixes and prefixes, spelling rules, concepts, so that the student really has an overall understanding of English in our case. Next, I think. We use, it's a multisensory technique. There's constant student-teacher interaction. We use certainly auditory and visual, but there is plenty of opportunity for tactile and kinesthetic elements as well. Any skill that is taught, anything new that is taught, is always reinforced by listening, by speaking, reading, and writing. Next slide, please. And again, as I mentioned, it's very systematic. Most Orton-Gillingham-based lessons are systematic. They might not be exactly the way Anna Gillingham set it out 80 years ago, because things have changed, and we are asking children to learn different representations for phonemes at an earlier age now. So we might have changed it a little bit. But it's very logical. It's very understandable order. The children start reading and writing sounds in isolation. As soon as you have 3 sounds that can make a word, we blend them together. We start blending into syllables and then words. And every lesson, or every other lesson sometimes, new material might be taught, but every lesson, the material that's been previously taught is reviewed. And it's reviewed and reviewed until it's automatic. And that's called mastery. Orton-Gillingham also certainly goes into vocabulary, sentence structure, and reading comprehension, again in a structured, sequential way. I always try to, students learn about the history of the English language. I always like to tell them, even at an early age, in first and second grade, about the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes, and where we get Anglo-Saxon and where we get certain words from. I like them to become sort of word detectives, so that they know if a word has a Greek origin, that we're not going to use an F, we're going to use a PH, for example. That might be a little bit later. But if you've ever seen spelling bees, when the children ask, well, what's the origin of that language, and can you pronounce it 5 ways, or things like that, that gives you clues to our language and how to spell and how to say a word. We study the rules that govern our language. And syllabication, which is also very, very important, as well as other concepts in English. I think that the more you teach, the more the children understand, the more they'll remember and apply what they've learned. Oh, next slide. Okay. Whether I'm in a classroom situation or I'm tutoring, I have a tutoring practice. The OG method is diagnostic. We find out first what the child or the children know, and then we see where our child is struggling, what they need, and we go from there. And so it's prescriptive in that we focus on that child's needs and issues, and teach according to that child. In an individual Orton lesson, everything is based on what that child knows and what has been taught. One nice thing about an Orton Gillingham lesson is that a child never really sees what they don't know or what they're not taught, and so they experience success right away. If a child only knows 3 sounds, b, a, and let's say t, well, then they're going to read the word bat, or they might read the word tap, but they've experienced success now in reading. And that's very important. If then we introduce the letter C and the hard C sound, like, well, now we've added another word to our repertoire, cat. But they're still reading bat and tap, so now we're up to 3 words. And as we keep increasing, or they might even be able to read the word act. So as we keep increasing the number of representations of phonemes, the more words they're reading, until we obviously get to reading short sentences, reading and writing short sentences, and again, they meet success right away, rather than, because generally they come into my classroom feeling like failures, and we want to eradicate that as fast as possible. That feeling. Next slide. Oh, wow. So, we're here. So Andrew and I are going to do a mock OG lesson. Generally, an OG lesson takes about an hour. Everything is pretty much timed, and we start out always every lesson with our card pack. This is our card pack. The only thing in our card pack are the sounds or the representation of sounds that the child or children have already been taught. Nothing's new here. And this is done every single lesson. It's very important that the child learns how to say a sound properly. For example, many people add vowels to their sound. So instead of the sound k, they'll say k, or they'll say b. A child, especially a child with some difficulty blending, is going to have more difficulty blending if you're adding other sounds to the sound. So we try to make the sounds as pure as possible, and have the child say them as pure as possible. So Andrew is I'm going to hold up the card, and obviously not all of them are here, but he's going to say the sounds.
So I'll try. Ah.
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 Ah. Now, if the child does not say the sound correctly, goes back in the card pack, because we want another hit where he or she is going to say it correctly.
Robin, just give me 1 second. I want to adjust the camera just so I'm able to look right directly at your cards.
Sorry.
And I apologize for this audience, but I just want to make sure that when we do this, it really shows you kind of like what you might actually be seeing if your child was actually having one of these lessons. So thank you for bearing with us. Let me see. I think that should work out well. I think that's good.
You good?
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm good.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Good.
Fa.
Cut the vowel, Andrew. Good job.
Ba.
Cut the vowel. B.
B.
Okay, so we go through the card pack, and I hope people notice too that I'm constantly praising. Good job. Well done. I'm not going to be saying a lot of negatives like, no, that's not the way it is. It's just cut the vowel, just responses like that, so that he knows what to do but doesn't feel bad about it. Okay. Now, students have a worksheet. I don't know if you can see that here. I guess you can. And I made up this worksheet so that it's got all the different components on it, and the children are generally, trained where to write everything. The first part of this worksheet is where to write sounds, because after we say sounds, we write sounds. And so I say a sound, I dictate a sound, and then Andrew is going to say it, and then he's going to also say it again as he writes it. And this again reinforces it and hopefully gets into his memory. So let's see. First sound. I should say, I make up a worksheet ahead of time so I know exactly what I'm keying into. Generally, the sounds that we're going to be writing, because we write 10, 12 sounds, are sounds that I want to reinforce. I usually always keep in the vowels, but if a sound is mastered, let's say a m, I'm not going to put it in here. I'm going to put in the ones that we've recently taught or that the child needs practice with. So first sound, Andrew.
Ready?
Say ah.
Ah.
Now write and say ah.
Writing ah.
Okay. Say b.
B.
Now write and say b.
So I've got my pen and I'm writing on the worksheet she gave me. B.
Okay. And as we go down this worksheet, if in fact, if I say, I don't know, let's say I say s, and Andrew writes something different than an S, because let's say some children actually will write a C, I'll bring out my card and I'll say that, let's say it's a C, I'll tell him that says maybe k, because I haven't taught him that C says S yet, and I'll say this says S. Let's trace it, Andrew, with our fingers, and Andrew's going to, usually it's on the desk, and Andrew will make this S with his two fingers and say S 3 times, and he's going to, sometimes for some children, I have this needlepoint canvas, and I might put that, you can see the S right over it, and so maybe I'll have him, Andrew's over there, but maybe I'll have Andrew trace it over this canvas because it's going to be more tactile, and maybe I feel that for this particular student, he needs that to help reinforce it and get into his memory.
So Robin, I would actually, if I was the student and I was struggling with this S sound, I would really literally have that in front of me on my table with the S, and with my fingers saying it while at the same time sort of feeling it across this line. Okay.
Just like I'm doing now.
Okay.
Okay. Then I personally might have him again on that worksheet. Now write S again, Andrew. Please
Okay.
write it and say it. Okay. So that he does it and it's the right thing that's down. Okay. After I dictate the sounds, we might do a phonological awareness activity. Again, depending on the student, depending what I think he or she needs. So maybe my student has difficulty differentiating the initial sound b with the initial sound p, okay? And children do. So I'm going to say to Andrew, every time you hear a b sound in the beginning of a word, I want you to maybe stand up or raise your thumb. Sometimes I have them throw a chip just to get the movement moving. You can do whatever. Let's do thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Okay, so I'm going to start saying some words. Pan, cat, bat. Good. Okay. Pin, rum, bag. So that would be one activity. There are many. You could do the initial sounds with ending sounds or medial sounds. The medial become rather difficult, and that's generally manipulating the vowel. And again, there are loads and loads of phonemic awareness activities that a teacher can do and that a parent can do. And it's important to do those exercises. I think even 10 minutes every day gives you benefits. After that, we're going to do something called reading our word lists, and I make up word lists for each individual student, just using the sounds that I know that student knows, either has already mastered or that I've taught him or her. so that they never come across a word on these word lists that they cannot decode. For example, when we get to let's say multisyllabic words, a child might know the sounds for M-A-G, ag, and they might know N-E and T, and T. But I'm not going to give them magnet because we don't say magnet. It's called a schwa, and I haven't taught them schwa yet. So I have to be very careful of how the sounds also are pronounced in the word to make sure that they don't come across anything that they don't know, because I want success all the time. So Andrew will have a word list in front of him. And Andrew's going to get his finger ready to trace and say. So we're going to point. We point to the words, and Andrew's going to start reading the words on this first list. Andrew?
Bam, ban, and then this says, I'll make a mistake here, cat. What happens if I make a mistake? Cat.
Oh, Andrew, trace and say.
Or b.
And if he said "k," I would redirect him and say, "What is that first sound? Trace it." And he's going to make it with right underneath the word. He's going to make a B with his fingers. He's going to actually trace the letter, make that letter name. Can you see? I don't know if you can see that. B, a, t. And then I'm going to say, blend it together. Bat. Some children have blending issues, and that's. That can be very, very difficult. And so I might say, okay, what's the first sound? B. What's the next sound? Ah. Let's put them together. Ba. Good. Now say ba. And what's the third sound? T. Let's put the ba together with the t. Bat. And so that we get some blending activities in there as well, if that's the issue. Some children have and some don't. So he goes through the word list, and sometimes, I could put 30 words on a page. The child does not have to read 30 words. Maybe we read 5, maybe we read 10, but I want to get a variety of lists. So I have at least, 7 lists to read, and we try and get in as much as possible. There's always previously taught that we still need to reinforce. Obviously, when something is mastered, I could take it out.
So, Robin, I have a question actually from the audience, which I think goes to some of these word lists and sort of the Orton Gillingham approach or method generally. The question is from Sumeng Guo. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that question incorrectly, but the question is Orton Gillingham a general approach, or can it be tailored to each student's needs, like these word lists as sort of exercises?
It is tailored to each children's needs. An Orton Gillingham-based lesson, and tutoring, a one-on-one lesson, is tailored to the specific child. When I do a group lesson in my reading intervention classes, where I might have 5 children, I tailor it to the group. And they may be on different levels. Many times I tailor it to the child who has the least. When I taught in general education and taught an entire class, they got what I taught. There were children who could already read. It didn't matter. I tailored it to the sort of like the lowest common denominator. So everything is tailored.
So I had a follow-up question on that. When it's tailoring, my son has some, attention impulsivity kind of issues. What happens when a child might, this is a lot of exercises, if they may have some behavior issues? How does an Orton Gillingham sort of instructor like yourself handle that situation?
It depends on if it's a one-on-one or a small group or a whole class. And it depends on what the behavior is. I tend to not let many things bother me, so that if a child is moving around, I don't care. If you want to stand up while we're doing this, I don't care. I think a lot of it's training. On a one-on-one, where I have had difficulties, I explain one-on-one, do you know why you're here? A lot of children don't know why they're being tutored. They're feeling bad, but they don't really understand. And I say, are you having any trouble reading by any chance? Or they might tell me, I don't read so well. I said, well, you came to the right place, and I talk to them. In a small group situation, well, also, they didn't call me Sergeant Margent for nothing. I'm strict. The children know it. Ultimately, I think they respect it, because eventually, as soon as they see they've met a little success, and that's why you want success so quickly, they go, okay, this is going to work. And once they buy into it, you don't have a problem. For a child in a whole class situation, if I have a child who has a behavior issue, but they're really reading and writing and can spell okay, I don't care so much, to be honest. I'm going to rein them in a little, and I don't want them bothering someone else, but I might get them, I might even divide the class and say, okay, this side you're all writing impulsive. Okay, this side you're writing bat. And alternate it. I might find something for a child who's just behavior, but the reading and the writing for what I'm doing is okay with them already. They know it. I'm going to give them another activity to do. I might have them read something and make a writing response in a different part of the room. So there are lots of ways to attack it. It really is individual. It depends on the child. Totally.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And Sameng, if you're watching and you got your, hopefully you got your question answered, I'll hand it back over to Robin to continue some of the other mock OG-based lesson exercises.
Okay, so after we read the word lists, which are phonetic, only words that you can sound out. We read something called red words. The red words are the words in our language that don't follow patterns. A lot of them are Anglo-Saxon, and that's where I would have explained to the class the history and where some of these words came from. They're usually words that have really weird spelling, like could, would, and should. And you have to memorize them. You're not going to be able to sound them out. Parts of them might be soundable, but the whole word is not soundable. And so we read the red words. Andrew?
Okay. Can you hold it out? The?
Oh, sorry, I goofed. The.
And I'm going to make a mistake on this one. Toe. Or toe.
Toe. Okay. Andrew, this says two. Trace it 3 times and say the letter names. T. O. 2. Do it, please.
T. O. 2.
Again.
T. O. 2.
Again, please.
T. O. 2.
Okay, so 3 times is the magic number for a mistake. You reinforce it 3 times. We're going to go on to the next card. L.
Do.
And oftentimes I do this, at least with my groups at school, if they miss it.
2. You. 2. And this is the one that a lot of kids get wrong, right? Was.
Was, yes. A lot of children get was wrong. And sometimes, you can't do it with all of the words, but sometimes you can come up with like a mnemonic, a little scenario so that maybe they can remember it. So for was, I might say, well, he was so hungry, Willie ate soup. So if you can remember the beginning letter for each of those 3 words, Willie ate soup, you can remember how to spell was.
Okay.
Obviously, you can't make up a mnemonic for all of them, and the children can't remember all of them, although I've had some children who that was the only thing that worked for almost every word. So you never know. You try everything. So once we read the red words, we spell words. And again, Andrew has the sheet in front of him, and there's a section there that says spell words. And I'm going to dictate a word, and Andrew is going to write it. So I say mob. Andrew repeats the word
mob.
And then Andrew puts it on his fingers first. You're doing it.
B.
Okay, and now say those sounds as you write the word.
B.
Good job. Okay, next word. And the words, I am not, there's no pattern. I'm zeroing in on sounds that, and representations that I want reinforced, but I'm not going to give them all my M words at once. I'm going to scatter them, so like every 5 is going to be a word. But next word is sit.
So,
Good. Now write and say sit. Say the sounds.
Now, what if I made a mistake? What if I wrote S-E-T on my piece of paper when I was saying
Okay.
and I wrote S-E-T? What would happen then?
So I'm going to say, Andrew, that says set. I said sit. Let's put it back on your fingers. And I might reach across and that second sound say, and I might hold Andrew's finger and say, what's that second sound? And Andrew's going to say, Now, sometimes I might just ask what the second sound is. If a child's having difficulty, I actually pull on their finger. They feel it. And they generally get it. Okay. Good. Now let's write sit.
Okay.
And
this time I wrote it correctly, right, with S-I-T.
And now he writes it correctly, and I'm going to give him 2 more words that have the sound in it, because that's what he was having trouble with. So, and again, only words where I know he knows the representations and the sounds. So now I'm going to say bit. Say bit, Andrew.
Do you like me to sound it out this way, or?
Always the same.
Okay. B-it.
Good. Now write it and say the sounds.
B-it. Bit.
And then I'm going to give him yet another one. Okay, Andrew, say hit. Say the word, Andrew, please.
Oh, hit.
Good. Now, fingers.
It.
And please write the word.
It. And I spelled them right.
And you spelled it right. And then we're going to continue to go on down the list in that way. In all, the cards or saying the cards should take about 2 minutes. The spelling sound should take about 2 minutes. Phonemic awareness is a minute or 2. Reading the word list is 5 or 6 minutes. And spelling words is maybe 7 or 8 minutes. It doesn't take long. You do as many as you can in that time period, and you're always working on building up and getting more and more in there.
Robin, I wanted to just mention that we have gotten some questions for our audience. So I want to remind our audience that if you are asking a question, to make Robin's answers really useful for you, share the age of your child, the particular issue as much detail, and just so you can get the most useful answer. Because I've seen some people asking questions, and we'll definitely get to them. But definitely share those details about the age and where the particular challenge is, just to make Robin's answers most useful. So one of the first questions we got here, Robin, is from Carol from Boston, and she's asking, she's watching you do this mock lesson, Orton Gillingham, and she's asking if Orton Gillingham is administered with, fidelity. In other words, it's administered well and with rigor. How long should this kind of remediation take? Does it depend on the child?
Yes, it's not a quick fix, no matter what. We introduce one sound or concept or rule at a time. So if you're getting an Orton Gillingham lesson once or twice a week, it's going to take time. There are various levels, and again, it's not just introducing the sound A, but there are 7 different ways to get the sound A in our language. So we're going to be getting to, hopefully, at least some of them eventually. But I'm not going to introduce AY and AI and EY all at the same time. It depends on the child. It depends on on the challenge and the extent of that challenge. Some children are more severe than others. I don't think you can give a time limit. You want to see that you're making progress and that you're getting closer and closer to grade level as you're going on. So yeah, if you, the knowledge of the teacher is extremely important. If you practice this truly with fidelity, you should see progress, but it is not a quick fix.
Thanks for that. Carol, if you're out there, if you have a follow-up question, which I think you might have, definitely do ask it. Robin is here to answer. We also have another question from, and I'm not to break up the lesson a little bit, but I do want to make sure that we answer some of the people out there because they really are interested in what you have to say. This is from Anonymous 2989, and thank you, Anonymous 2989, for being really specific. And here's this person's question. She has a 16-year-old with dyslexia. Has been doing Sylvan learning, I guess, for 14 years, and doing some other things. And they're really wondering, I guess they haven't tried Orton Gillingham, and they're wondering if it'll work for a kid that's this old, 16 years old, beginning of high school. Is it something that they might want to try?
In my opinion, yes, absolutely. I've worked with teenagers. I've worked with middle schoolers and high schoolers. And it works with adults as well. Obviously you're going to start where the child needs to start. You're going to have to, Orton Gillingham, whoever the tutor or the teacher is, has to assess, see what they know, and you go on from there. I sometimes do, cleanups where, especially with an older kid, I know that they know the sound, but it's a little bit rusty. I'm not going to waste a whole lesson on that sound. I'm just going to put it into review and clean up and then go on to the more difficult. But yes, I truly believe it absolutely works for older children as well as for younger children.
So we just got a few questions there. They were asking about how it might look differently for an older child in high school as opposed to someone who's young. One specific question that I want to ask you, this is a 15-year-old. Thank you, Anonymous. This is another anonymous questioner. 15-year-old struggles with reading and comprehension in high school. What would an Orton Gillingham look for that child? And is it useful if a child is struggling with comprehension as opposed to the decoding parts?
Sometimes, too, it depends, I think. And that's a difficult question. And why are they struggling with the comprehension? Oftentimes, if you are not reading well or with any degree of fluency and you're really struggling with the decoding, it's very difficult to comprehend because all of your focus is on figuring out what the words are, and you forget and you don't know what you're reading. If it's due to that, then absolutely we want to concentrate, get the decoding better, and hopefully the comprehension will get better as well. If the comprehension is due to some other issues, then we work on comprehension. I mean, there's always a part of an Orton Gillingham lesson also that is just reading, like the last 15 minutes. And there are multisensory approaches out there that work specifically for comprehension. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention. Am I allowed to mention them?
I think it's okay.
It's okay. One is Project Read. Their comprehension strand, I think, is excellent. And it's multisensory and for fiction and for nonfiction. And again, it's very systematic, it's very structured, and you get a lot of practice. Okay. That's one of them. There are other ones out there used in conjunction with if a child's having trouble decoding as well. Used in conjunction, you should see progress.
Great. Robin, I know there's one more exercise in the mock OG lesson. Do you want to show that before we take some final questions from our audience?
Okay, well, very quickly, I'll just mention there's always a dictation. I dictate a sentence. Sam was in, and Andrew would write that sentence. Then we would proofread it with capitalization, organization, punctuation, and spelling. And the child learns to start looking and proofreading. If a word that is non-phonetic is spelled incorrectly, that the child writes that word 3 times while saying the letter names. If a phonetic word is written incorrectly, then I tell them to sound it out, put it on your fingers, and I give them 2 hits like I did previously. Okay. The last component of an OG lesson is introducing a new sound. So I might say to Andrew, what do you hear in these words? Cat, cop, capital, cup. And hopefully Andrew says?
Sound.
The k sound. And I will show this card and I'll say, yes, Andrew, this says k. And when you hear k before the vowel A, O, U, or before a consonant, this is your first choice because like 98% of the time it's going to be a C. This says k, and I'll have Andrew trace it 3 times, and then I might even have him skywrite it if he wants with a straight arm. And I'll have him write it 3 times on the worksheet under New Learning. And he'll write it and say, k, k, k. And then, of course, we will read. And I always, when I introduce something, I always have a picture of a key word. And we will read words like cat and can, etc. There will be controlled sentences, all words that I know Andrew can read, but there'll be a lot of k words in them, and he'll practice reading those. And I might do some phonemic awareness. Again, I'll say bat. Andrew has to put the new sound in. So if I say bat, Andrew says
cat.
If I say tab, Andrew says
cab.
If I say slot, Andrew says.
That's a hard one.
Yeah, I know. But I'm always. They call me Sergeant Margent for a reason. I'm always pushing. So I might throw that in, see if he can do it. And then we'll practice it because now I want him to get in a blend because this is what you use before a consonant, like R and L. All right? Okay. And then, of course, we will write words, same system, cab, put it on your fingers, say the sounds, write it. And the last component of the lesson, before we start reading and talking about books and etc., is the red word, and I'm going to always introduce a new red word, a word that is not phonetic or is so common that a child has to know it immediately. So here's the word R, and I tell Andrew, okay, Andrew, this says R. I need you to trace it 3 times on your desk. So he takes his 2 fingers, and let's do it. A. R. E. Just on your desk, write it. A, R, E, R, and say the word. Do it 3 times, please.
A, R, E, R, A, R, E, R, A, R, E, R.
Then I'll have him skywrite it with a straight arm in the air, and it hurts a little. It's supposed to. And he's going to write A, R, E in the air 3 times.
So A, R, E, R,
A,
R, E.
And he'll do that. Next, I'm going to have him write it on his arm. A, R, E, R.
A, R, E, R.
And he'll do that 3 times. And then I'll have him write it on his paper 3 times. That way he got 12 hits already with the word R. Sometimes children need up 40 hits. They might need even more before they remember it.
Yeah.
With a lot of practice, and that's what Orton Gillingham does. Teaches the structure of the English language and gives a child a lot of practice. Then for the last 15 minutes of the lesson, we read. Sometimes a controlled text first. Here's cop, cat, and primary phonics is and they have a lot of controlled text, and so I picked this because I know that he will be able to read most of the words, maybe not all of them. And if he can't read all of the words, I just give him that word. I don't want anybody to struggle. Or we might read again in a young step into reading book where I might even have to read a lot of the words, but we'll both read it together and enjoy it. And older children will read novels. We'll read books that everybody else is reading. And again, depending on where their level is. And sometimes, I'll read a page, they'll read a page, just because we want the enjoyment of reading, as well as being able to do it.
Awesome. So that's a really great introduction. There are just a few last questions that we'll take, and I just want to, because I know people have been waiting patiently, but I think that is a really great sort of, and of course this is just a mock lesson. The whole process is much longer, as Robin has mentioned. So these are just some examples of what happened. But let's just take one or two last questions from our audience, just so people waiting can get some answers. This is from Laura, and thank you again for being very specific. She has a 9-year-old in 3rd grade. Yesterday went for a screening for dyslexia, and she was told that her child does fall into the patterns of dyslexia. And she did find out that there's a family member with dyslexia. And she has kind of a simple, not simple question, but a straightforward question. Does there have to be a family history of dyslexia for her child to have dyslexia? Or is it sometimes, does that even matter?
Personally, I don't even think all right. It doesn't matter as far as what we're going to do to help the child read. Is dyslexia... Is there an inherited component? You bet. A lot of people with dyslexia have a relative somewhere who has struggled with reading. Could you be the first in your family? I'm no scientist, but I imagine you could.
Awesome. That's a great answer. That's very helpful. And if we have some content on our site, Laura, if you're interested to read a little bit more about those kinds of issues. Then this will be our last question. This is from Anonymous, another anonymous user, is really asking about the grammar piece of it. I know you went into that a little bit with one of your exercises, but how does Orton Gillingham really target that grammar piece or the writing piece, or is it really not for that? And if it's not a question that can be answered because it's too, that's completely fine.
It targets, we get into sentence writing because I dictate a sentence. As far as grammar, nouns, verbs, or whatever, I personally teach it. I use a melange of other systems like Project Read, because I think it's important that children know that every word in a sentence has a job. And I'll also teach, as we get on in lessons, and certainly with older children, when we get into prefixes and suffixes, I might teach that MENT says mint, and that when you add it to a word, it makes the word a noun, or that the suffix nis, N-E-S-S, makes the word a noun, that the suffix ly, lee, makes the word an adverb. It answers the question how. And so I'm going to explain all of that. And as I teach, I do explain about the jobs of different words and nouns and verbs, and I give my own plenty of practice. Is it part of an OG lesson? No. Okay.
That's very helpful. And I hope that Anonymous797, I hope that helps out with your question. Okay, so I guess I'm going to this is a question for me. If people want to find out more about Orton Gillingham resources in their own school or with a tutor, do you have any suggestions of where to look? And that'll be our last question.
I think a good organization is the International Dyslexia Association to contact, and you look at your state laws. There are states now with dyslexia laws, and they might have sites where you might go. IMSLEC, the International Multisensory, I can't remember all the rest of it. It's IMSLEC, is an organization that they list names of tutors in states, maybe where you live, and we might have to re-answer that question in the community because I don't have enough time.
That's okay. So if you are out there and you're really interested in Orton Gillingham, please go to our community and ask the question. See, there are a lot of parents there from across the country, and maybe they can help you connect locally. So thank you so much for that presentation, Robin. I think it was really wonderful and helpful for our audience.
Thank you so much.
And I just want to mention to our audience that, you're concerned about dyslexia, thinking about dyslexia. We have a really fantastic event coming up with Whoopi Goldberg. She has dyslexia, and she's going to be talking next Tuesday at 3:30 about her experience with dyslexia and reading issues. If you want to learn more about that, go to u.org/whoopi. That's WHOOPI, u.org/whoopi. We'll also paste it into the chat window. Watch that because I think it'll be a great way to sort of understand how kids with dyslexia, people with dyslexia, what happens in their lives with these issues. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and have a great day.